Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in Charleston's history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. In the summer of 1874, Charleston was still recovering from the devastation of the Civil War. The once grand homes along Battery Street stood in various states of repair as families struggled to reclaim their former prosperity. It was during this period of reconstruction that the Wilkins family purchased the old Hargrove estate on the outskirts of the historic district for what locals considered a suspiciously low price. The transaction was recorded on June 17th, with the seller notably absent during the proceedings, represented only by his attorney, who appeared eager to complete the sale. Thomas Wilkins was a Northerner who had made his fortune in textiles, and his arrival in Charleston with his wife Eleanor and their two unmarried sisters, Margaret and Catherine, was met with the customary Southern reserve afforded to those not born of Carolina soil. The family's purchase of the three-story Greek Revival home raised eyebrows, not only for the bargain they'd secured, but because of the property's troubled reputation. The previous owner, Mr. Hargrove, a shipbuilder by trade, had departed Charleston suddenly in 1865, leaving no forwarding address. What is particularly notable about the official property records, which can still be found in the county archives, is the unusual amendment attached to the deed of sale, a stipulation that the uppermost floor of the home would remain sealed for a minimum period of 30 years following the purchase. This curious clause was accompanied by a statement releasing the previous owner from all liability for any discoveries or consequences resulting from entry to said floor before the prescribed date. Thomas Wilkins, being a practical businessman, questioned this restriction, but was assured by the attorney that it was merely a formality related to the estate's tax obligations during Reconstruction. According to the weekly journal entries of Eleanor Wilkins, discovered decades later in a chest in the garden shed, her husband agreed to the terms only after securing a substantial reduction in the already modest asking price. "Today we have completed the purchase of our new home," wrote Eleanor on June 20th. "Thomas believes we have made an exceptional bargain, though I confess to some unease about the sealed third floor. The realtor assured us it contains nothing but old furniture and building materials left by Mr. Hargrove, who apparently had plans for expansion that were abandoned during the war. Thomas has promised we shall respect the previous owner's wishes, though I cannot help but wonder what legitimate reason would necessitate such an unusual request." The Wilkins family settled into the first two floors of their new residence throughout the sweltering summer of 1874. The diaries of Eleanor document the gradual transformation of the property as walls were repainted, floors polished, and gardens tended. Yet even as the lower portions of the home began to reflect the family's northern sensibilities, the third floor remained untouched, its entrance at the top of the main staircase sealed with heavy oak planking and secured with an iron padlock for which no key had been provided. By all accounts from neighbors and business associates, the Wilkins family quickly established themselves in Charleston society. Thomas opened a small textile import office on East Bay Street, while Eleanor and her sisters-in-law became active in the Ladies' Benevolent Society. Their integration into the community might have continued unremarkably had it not been for the events that began to unfold in October of that same year. According to the journal of Dr. William Preston, the family physician called to attend to Catherine Wilkins, the eldest sister began complaining of persistent and troubling dreams, in which she claimed to hear movements and murmurings from above her bedroom ceiling. Dr. Preston initially diagnosed nervous exhaustion and prescribed a tincture of valerian root, noting that Miss Wilkins's agitation seemed to increase markedly after sundown. "Miss Catherine Wilkins presents with symptoms of acute nervous distress," wrote Dr. Preston in his medical log dated October 12th. She reports auditory disturbances emanating from the sealed third floor, describing them as scratching and whispering that intensify during the night hours. Physical examination reveals no abnormalities, though her pulse is somewhat elevated. I have recommended increased dosage of sedatives and suggested to Mr. Wilkins that perhaps some investigation of possible animal intrusion in the attic spaces might be warranted. Thomas Wilkins, however, remained reluctant to breach the terms of their purchase agreement. According to Eleanor's journal, he dismissed his sister's concerns as the product of an overactive imagination and the natural settling of an older home. He did, however, engage the services of a local carpenter to examine the exterior of the house for any possible entry points that might allow for rodent or raccoon habitation. The carpenter, one Samuel Blackwood, provided a written report dated October 16th, stating that the house appeared structurally sound, with no obvious means for animal entry to the upper floor. He did, however, note the curious construction of the third-floor windows, which, unlike the rest of the house, had been sealed from the inside with boards that appeared to have been installed many years prior, even before the war. It was Eleanor's younger sister-in-law, Margaret, who first noticed what would later be described as the peculiar discoloration on the ceiling of the second-floor hallway. Initially dismissed as water damage from a leaking roof, the stain expanded gradually through late October, despite there being no rainfall during what was recorded as an unusually dry autumn. Eleanor's journal entry from October 23rd describes the phenomenon. The mark on the hallway ceiling has grown again. Thomas insists it is merely old water damage becoming more visible as the house settles, but I cannot help but observe that its shape appears almost deliberate, like a map or some kind of script. Margaret refuses to walk beneath it, and Catherine has taken to sleeping in the downstairs parlor, claiming the sounds above her former bedroom have become unbearable. Thomas remains adamant that we must honor our agreement regarding the third floor, though I see him looking up at the ceiling with increasing frequency. By early November, the household staff, consisting of a cook, a maid, and a groundskeeper, all local Charleston residents, began to express their own concerns. According to later statements given to the local newspaper, the maid refused to clean the second-floor hallway, claiming that the ceiling stain wept during the early morning hours, though no actual moisture could be detected when Thomas examined it. The cook, a woman named Sarah, who had previously worked for several prominent Charleston families, gave notice on November 7th, citing unwholesome conditions in the kitchen pantry, where foodstuffs would be found rearranged each morning, despite the doors being locked each night. The groundskeeper, though he maintained his employment, requested that his duties be restricted to the exterior of the property, refusing to enter the house even during the increasingly cool November evenings. What might have remained merely an uncomfortable domestic situation escalated dramatically on the night of November 15th, when Charleston experienced its first autumn storm. According to both Eleanor's journal and a subsequent report filed with the local constabulary, the family was awakened shortly after midnight by a tremendous crash from the sealed third floor. "We were jolted from sleep by a sound like nothing I have ever heard," wrote Eleanor. Not thunder, though the storm was fierce, but rather like the collapse of heavy furniture, or perhaps a section of wall. Thomas, after some hesitation, took his pistol and lantern and ascended the stairs to the sealed entrance of the third floor. He examined the planking and lock, both of which remained intact, showing no signs of disturbance. Yet, while we stood in the hallway, all of us heard it distinctly, a low, continuous scraping sound moving across the floor above us, followed by what Margaret insists was the sound of labored breathing. Thomas, for the first time since we arrived, appeared genuinely shaken. He has written to Mr. Hargrove's attorney demanding an explanation for what might be contained in the sealed floor. The response from the attorney, preserved in the Wilkins family papers, was both prompt and unsettling. The brief letter, dated November 17th, stated only that Mr. Hargrove had left the country permanently, that his whereabouts were unknown, and that the terms of the sale were legally binding. The letter concluded with what could only be interpreted as a warning. I would advise most strongly against any attempt to access the third floor before the prescribed time has elapsed. Mr. Hargrove was most insistent on this point, and while I am not at liberty to disclose his reasons, I can assure you they were considered sufficient to warrant the unusual nature of the agreement. This response did little to calm the increasingly tense atmosphere in the Wilkins household. According to Eleanor's journal entries from late November, Thomas began spending his evenings in his study with a bottle of brandy, while Catherine's health deteriorated to the point where Dr. Preston recommended she be sent to stay with friends in Columbia. Margaret developed a persistent cough that was attributed to the damp Charleston winter, but which she insisted began only when she was inside the house. The situation reached a critical point on December 3rd, when Eleanor awoke to find Thomas standing in the second-floor hallway, staring up at the ceiling stain, which by her description had now expanded to cover nearly half the ceiling and had developed distinct patterns that she likened to a diagram or architectural drawing of some kind. According to her account, Thomas had not slept, having spent the night listening to what he now admitted were unmistakable sounds of movement from the sealed floor above. This morning, she wrote, Thomas finally acknowledged what we have all known for weeks. There is something in the third floor of our home, something that moves and breathes and seems to be working methodically at some task we cannot discern. He has resolved to break the terms of our agreement and open the sealed doorway. When I reminded him of the possible legal consequences, he replied in a voice I scarcely recognized, I fear there may be far graver consequences if we continue to ignore what is happening above our heads. On December 4th, 1874, Thomas Wilkins, accompanied by 2 men from his textile office, removed the planking and broke the lock that had sealed the third-floor entrance. What they discovered was documented in a private letter Thomas wrote to his brother in Boston, a letter that remained sealed until 1932, when it was discovered during the eventual demolition of the house. The contents of that letter form the basis for our understanding of what the Wilkins family encountered and why they subsequently made their own decision to reseal the third floor, this time with reinforced materials and multiple locks, a sealing that would remain intact for nearly a century. According to Thomas's letter, the sealed doorway opened onto a narrow staircase, thick with dust and cobwebs, suggesting it had indeed remained untouched for years. The air that greeted them was described as stagnant and peculiarly acrid, with an underlying scent that Thomas compared to the preservative chemicals used in medical specimens. The men ascended with caution, their lanterns casting long shadows on walls that, unlike the rest of the house, were unplastered and showed the raw wooden framework of the structure. What awaited them at the top of the stairs was not, as they had half expected, a conventional attic space filled with discarded furniture or building materials. Instead, they entered what Thomas described as a workshop of sorts, meticulously arranged and apparently abandoned in great haste. The room occupied the entire third floor, its windows boarded from the inside as the carpenter had noted. A large table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by shelves containing dozens of glass jars, their contents obscured by years of dust. The table itself, wrote Thomas, bore the unmistakable signs of regular and recent use, despite our understanding that the room had been sealed for nearly a decade. The dust had been cleared in a precise circle, approximately 4 feet in diameter, and within this space lay various instruments of a surgical or scientific nature, many of which I could not identify. Most disturbing was the diagram drawn in what appeared to be charcoal directly onto the wood of the table, a complex series of interlocking circles and lines that corresponded exactly to the pattern that had emerged on our hallway ceiling below. The men proceeded to examine the contents of the room methodically. Hargrove, who was apparently not merely a shipbuilder, as they had been led to believe, but a man with significant interest in what he termed Forbidden Scientific Inquiries. The journals, spanning a period from 1859 to 1865, detailed Hargrove's growing obsession with what he considered the breakthrough of his lifetime, experiments that Thomas described only as contrary to both natural law and ethical scientific practice. His early entries showed a man of scientific inclination, referencing correspondence with medical practitioners throughout Europe, and even mentions of a visit to witness demonstrations of electrical stimulation of muscle tissue in recently deceased subjects. The shelves yielded journals and logbooks, all written in what Thomas described as a cramped, hurried hand, documenting experiments conducted by the home's previous owner, Mr. As the journals progressed, however, Hargrove's tone shifted from scientific inquiry to something more fervent. By 1863, during the height of the Civil War, he wrote of successful experiments and observations, though he was frustratingly vague about his subjects or methods. The final journal, dated April 1865, contained increasingly erratic entries, culminating in a triumphant declaration, "Success at last. The procedure is complete. Observable response continues. I have done what no man before has accomplished." This final journal ended abruptly, with no explanation for Hargrove's sudden departure from Charleston weeks later. Thomas and his companions, growing increasingly uneasy, turned their attention to the glass jars that lined the shelves. Wiping away decades of dust, they discovered that each container was meticulously labeled with dates and what appeared to be initials. The contents of these containers, Thomas wrote, defied immediate classification. Neither liquid nor solid, the substance within each jar appeared to possess a quality of movement that cannot be attributed to the disturbance of our handling. The material, grayish in color with darker striations throughout, seemed to shift and reorganize itself even as we observed it, pressing against the glass as if seeking exit. It was at this point in their exploration that the men experienced what Thomas described as a sensation of overwhelming scrutiny, as if they themselves had become the subjects of examination. The temperature in the room dropped precipitously, their breath becoming visible in the suddenly frigid air. The lantern flames dimmed and wavered despite the absence of any detectable draft. Most alarming, according to Thomas's account, was the behavior of the substance in the jar labeled E.H. April 14, 1865. The date coinciding with Hargrove's final journal entry. As the men watched, the material within pressed against the glass with such force that fine cracks began to appear in the surface of the container. "We retreated hastily," wrote Thomas, "overcome by a certainty that we were in the presence of something that, while not living in any conventional sense, possessed awareness and intent. As we backed toward the staircase, the cracking of the glass intensified, and I swear to you, though it defies all rational explanation, the substance within the jar formed itself, momentarily but unmistakably, into the approximation of a human face, its features contorted in what could only be described as rage or desperation." The men fled down the stairs, Thomas pausing only long enough to secure the door with the broken lock temporarily wedged closed. By his own admission, they spoke little of what they had seen as they descended to the main floor of the house, each seemingly reluctant to articulate the implications of their discovery. That same evening, according to Eleanor's journal, Thomas summoned a local minister, a carpenter, and a blacksmith to the house. The group worked through the night, first removing the items from the third floor, the journals, instruments, and glass jars, all of which were loaded into a wagon and taken away under the minister's supervision. The destination of these artifacts was not recorded, though local legend suggests they were buried in unconsecrated ground near the marshes outside the city. Following the removal of the room's contents, the carpenter and blacksmith set about sealing the third-floor entrance more securely than before. Heavy oak beams were installed across the doorway, reinforced with iron bands forged on site by the blacksmith. Multiple locks were affixed with the keys distributed among Thomas, the minister, and a third party whose identity Eleanor did not specify in her journal. "Thomas has emerged from this ordeal transformed," wrote Eleanor on December 6th. "The confident, practical man I married now jumps at shadows and speaks in whispers. He has sworn us all to secrecy regarding what was discovered on the third floor, saying only that Mr. Hargrove engaged in practices contrary to the laws of God and nature, and that the fruits of his labors must remain contained and undisturbed. He has indicated that we shall be leaving Charleston as soon as arrangements can be made, though he insists the house must remain in our ownership to ensure the security of the sealed floor." The following weeks saw the rapid disentanglement of the Wilkins family from their Charleston life. Thomas closed his textile office, Eleanor and her sisters withdrew from their social engagements, and preparations were made to return to Boston. Curiously, despite their apparent eagerness to depart, Thomas insisted on establishing a trust for the ongoing maintenance of the property, with strict instructions that the third floor was to remain sealed and the house unoccupied. A copy of this trust agreement, filed with a local bank in January 1875, stipulated that the property was to be overseen by a caretaker who would visit weekly but never stay overnight. The document included the unusual provision that if any sounds were reported coming from the third floor, the minister who had assisted with the sealing was to be contacted immediately. The Wilkins family departed Charleston on January 15, 1875, having spent just 7 months in the house they had purchased with such optimism. According to ship manifests, they returned to Boston, where Thomas resumed his previous business connections, though associates noted he was much changed from the ambitious entrepreneur who had sought new opportunities in the South. For the next 23 years, the house on the outskirts of Charleston's historic district stood empty, but meticulously maintained according to the terms of the trust established by Thomas Wilkins. Regular reports from the caretaker, a Mr. James Pickett, documented the changing seasons, minor repairs to the exterior, and occasional curiosity from neighbors or passers-by about the persistently vacant property. These reports, preserved in the records of the bank that administered the trust, make no mention of unusual occurrences until 1898, when the aging Mr. Pickett noted in his monthly correspondence that the boards across the third-floor windows have begun to show signs of deterioration from within, as if something were pressing against them. This observation prompted a visit from a representative of the Wilkins family, Thomas having passed away in 1893, who authorized repairs but specifically instructed that the windows were to be reinforced from the outside without disturbing the original interior boarding. In February 1899, Mr. Pickett reported the first audible disturbance from the third floor in nearly 25 years. A persistent tapping, as of a small hammer or tool, seeming to work methodically around the perimeter of the space. Following protocol established decades earlier, the minister was notified, though by this time the original clergyman had died, and his successor approached the situation with some skepticism. Nevertheless, according to church records, the new minister, accompanied by 2 deacons, visited the property to inspect the sealed doorway. Finding the locks and reinforcements intact, they performed what was described as a blessing of containment before departing. The tapping reportedly ceased following this intervention, though Mr. Pickett noted in his subsequent reports an increasing reluctance to remain in the house for any longer than absolutely necessary to perform his duties. The most significant development in the property's history following the Wilkins family's departure occurred in December 1899, when a severe storm caused substantial damage to the roof directly above the third floor. Water penetration was reported, requiring immediate attention to prevent structural compromise. The contractor engaged for the repairs, according to his detailed invoice, discovered that the roof damage appeared to have been caused not by wind or falling debris as initially assumed, but rather from pressure applied from below, as if something inside the attic had been attempting to break through. His workers, alarmed by this finding and by what they described as movement visible beneath the floorboards, refused to complete the repairs from inside the attic, and instead worked entirely from the exterior. It was during these repairs that the contractor made a discovery that would add another layer to the growing legend of the Hargrove Wilkins house. Hidden within the eaves, preserved from the elements in a small metal box, was a letter written by Hargrove himself, apparently placed there during the original construction of the third floor. The letter, dated March 1859, addressed to whoever might discover this communication, contained a cryptic warning: "I have embarked upon a path of discovery that will fundamentally alter mankind's understanding of natural sciences. The room I have constructed here will serve as the laboratory for my greatest achievement. Should I succeed, as I believe I shall, the implications are boundless. Should I fail, or should my work be interrupted, I leave this warning. What has been begun cannot be easily ended. That which has been disturbed may seek to complete itself even without my guidance." This discovery prompted the Wilkins family trustees to commission a more thorough examination of the property. In early 1900, a team consisting of a structural engineer, a physician with interest in scientific anomalies, and a representative of the church was granted limited access to examine the sealed doorway and the exterior of the third floor. Their findings, documented in a report completed in March 1900, confirmed the structural integrity of the ceiling measures, but noted several disturbing anomalies. Temperature readings taken at the door to the third floor were consistently 15 to 20 degrees colder than the surrounding area. Metal components of the locks showed unusual patterns of oxidation, inconsistent with normal aging processes, and, most alarmingly, acoustic tests indicated activity within the sealed space that the physician described as rhythmic and purposeful, suggesting organized movement rather than random settling or the activity of vermin. The report concluded with a unanimous recommendation that the ceiling of the third floor not only be maintained but reinforced with additional measures. Furthermore, they advised that the entire property be encircled with a high wall or fence to discourage trespassers, noting that curiosity regarding the long vacant house has grown within the community, particularly among the young, several of whom have reportedly accepted dares to spend nights on the grounds. The Wilkins family trustees acted on these recommendations promptly. Construction records from March 1900 show the installation of a 7-foot wrought iron fence around the property perimeter, featuring locked gates and decorative elements specifically designed to make climbing difficult. Additionally, the windows of the first and second floors were fitted with interior shutters and exterior iron grills, ostensibly for security purposes, but serving the dual function of making observation of the house's interior nearly impossible from the outside. Most significantly, the trustees arranged for a more permanent solution to the third-floor containment. A master stonemason was engaged to construct a false wall at the top of the second-floor staircase, effectively concealing the entrance to the third floor entirely. This wall, built of solid brick and finished to match the surrounding decor, created the illusion that the house had only 2 floors, the staircase now appearing to terminate naturally at a decorative landing with a small window. The mason's invoice, dated April 19, 1900, includes a curious footnote. During the construction of the concealing wall, peculiar sounds were audible from beyond the sealed door, resembling whispers in multiple voices engaged in rapid conversation. These ceased abruptly when I made my presence known by deliberately dropping a tool. I share this observation not to alarm, but to emphasize the wisdom of the containment measures being implemented. With these final modifications complete, the Hargrove Wilkins house entered the 20th century as one of Charleston's most enigmatic properties, externally maintained but persistently vacant, surrounded by a growing collection of local legends and speculations about why such a seemingly desirable residence remained unoccupied decade after decade. The history of the Hargrove Wilkins house following these final modifications in 1900 is largely a matter of local legend and speculation, as the property remained under the strict control of the Wilkins family trust, with no documented access to the sealed third floor. Local historian Frederick Pendleton, writing in 1898, noted that among the curious architectural anomalies of our city, none presents a greater enigma than the Hargrove Wilkins residence, a property of evident quality and desirability, which has stood empty for nearly a quarter century, maintained meticulously, but inhabited only by whispers and conjecture. The trust established by Thomas Wilkins had been structured with remarkable foresight, providing sufficient funds for the property's indefinite maintenance and explicitly prohibiting its sale or occupation. What is known with certainty, based on the Trust's annual reports, is that the house continued to be maintained externally while remaining unoccupied, a peculiar monument to whatever secrets Thomas Wilkins had deemed necessary to contain. The term stipulated that the trust would remain in effect until such time as can be determined with absolute certainty that the containment is no longer necessary, a condition so vague as to ensure perpetual enforcement. As the 19th century drew to a close, the house had become something of a local landmark, pointed out to visitors as the Sealed House or the Wilkins Mystery. Children in the neighborhood developed elaborate dares involving approaching the property at night or throwing stones at the boarded windows, though the high fence installed in early 1900 largely put an end to such activities. According to an account published in the Charleston Evening Courier in February 1900, a group of university students who had scaled the fence on a dare reported hearing a sound like distant conversation, though no words could be distinguished, emanating from the upper portion of the house. The newspaper treated the incident as youthful mischief, but it contributed to the property's growing reputation as a place best avoided after dark. The most detailed description of the house in its final state comes from the diary of Mrs. Elizabeth Thornton, wife of a prominent Charleston banker, who attended a small gathering at a neighboring property in April 1900. She wrote, "From the upper veranda, one has a clear view of the infamous Wilkins house. Even in the bright afternoon sunshine, there is something undeniably oppressive about its appearance. The windows covered with iron grills as if to keep something in rather than out. The grounds immaculately maintained, yet utterly lifeless. Most curious is the third floor, which from this vantage appears oddly distorted, the windows seeming to change their dimensions when viewed too directly." My host, noting my interest, mentioned that on certain nights, particularly during storms, lights have been observed moving behind the boarded windows, though the property has no gas or electrical service. The Wilkins family, having returned to Boston, maintained a conspicuous silence regarding the Charleston property. When approached by journalists or historians seeking information about the house's peculiarities, family representatives invariably declined comment or provided only the most perfunctory acknowledgment of ownership. Thomas Wilkins, until his death in 1893, reportedly refused to discuss the property entirely, even with close associates. His will, however, contained a sealed addendum specifically addressing the Charleston house, with instructions that it was to be opened only in the event that the property's integrity was compromised. The contents of this document have never been made public, though rumors persist that it contained detailed instructions for what the executor of the estate referred to cryptically as containment failure protocols. The final documented incident involving the Hargrove Wilkins house prior to 1900 occurred during an unusually severe storm in September 1899. According to reports filed with the local constabulary, multiple residents of neighboring properties reported hearing what was described as a prolonged, high-pitched wailing coming from the direction of the sealed house, a sound so distinct and disturbing that several households sent for authorities, fearing some person was in distress. When officers arrived, they found the property secure, as always, with no signs of disturbance beyond minor storm damage. The caretaker, summoned from his own residence several blocks away, conducted a perfunctory external inspection and declared that the house remained undisturbed. The sounds, which had ceased by the time authorities arrived, were attributed to wind moving through the partially sealed structure or perhaps the collapse of some internal architectural element. However, one officer, in his official report, noted something that would later be stricken from the public record. Upon approaching the eastern side of the property, I observed what appeared to be a face pressed against one of the third-floor windows, a face like none I have ever seen, distorted and seemingly fluid in its movements. When I directed my lantern toward this apparition, it retreated from view, leaving only a momentary fog upon the glass. I make note of this observation with full awareness of how it may be received, but feel compelled by duty to record what I witnessed. This report, filed by Officer James Holloway, was subsequently sealed by order of the Chief Constable, who noted in the margin, "Holloway has submitted his resignation, citing his intention to relocate to family property in Georgia. No further investigation of this fanciful account is warranted." The Wilkins Family Trust, upon receiving notification of the incident, authorized additional security measures for the property, including more frequent caretaker visits and the installation of reinforced shutters over all windows. These modifications were completed by late October 1899, further isolating the house from external observation and, perhaps, containing whatever remained inside. The caretaker's log from this period, maintained by the aging Mr. Pickett, records increasing reluctance to remain on the property after dusk. His entries, initially detailed and methodical, become increasingly terse, often consisting of nothing more than confirmation that the exterior remained secure and that no sounds were detected from the upper floor, a notation that appears with suspicious regularity, as if he were deliberately avoiding acknowledgment of what he might have heard. In his final entry, dated December 30th, 1899, Pickett wrote, "The masonry work is complete. The entrance to the third floor is now fully concealed behind the false wall. The minister has performed the blessing as requested by the trustees. I pray it will be sufficient." With the dawning of the new century, the Hargrove Wilkins house stood as a silent enigma, externally unremarkable, save for its persistent vacancy, internally harboring whatever secrets had driven Thomas Wilkins to such extraordinary measures of containment. The property would remain in this state for decades to come, maintained by the trust with unwavering diligence, a peculiar monument to horrors best left undisturbed. Local legend suggests that on the night Thomas Wilkins died in Boston, February 3, 1893, lights were observed moving through every room of the Charleston house, though it had no functioning gas or electrical service. Similarly, when the last of his sisters passed away in 1898, residents of neighboring properties reported hearing what sounded like a distant celebration emanating from the sealed residence. These tales, recorded by folklorist Margaret Simmons in her 1899 collection Charleston Whispers, reflect the city's enduring fascination with the property and whatever malevolence it might contain. Simmons noted that among the city's older residents, particularly those from the servant class who might have had contact with the original household staff, there was a persistent belief that something not quite human resided in the Wilkins house, something that had driven the family away but could not be destroyed. The most tantalizing suggestion of what might actually have occurred in the house comes from a fragment of correspondence discovered among the effects of Dr. William Preston, the physician who had treated Catherine Wilkins during the family's brief residence. In a letter to a medical colleague dated January 1875, shortly after the Wilkins family's departure from Charleston, Preston wrote, "The case which so perplexed me last autumn has been resolved in a manner I could never have anticipated. While professional discretion prevents me from providing specific details, I can say only that Mr. Hargrove, the previous owner of the property, appears to have been engaged in experiments of a most unnatural and reprehensible nature. Thomas Wilkins has shared with me, in strict confidence, certain observations made during his exploration of the sealed floor, which, if true, would challenge the most fundamental principles of natural philosophy. The decision to contain rather than destroy what was discovered reflects, I believe, not merely caution but genuine uncertainty as to whether destruction is even possible. I have provided what medical advice I can regarding the ongoing security measures, but find myself hoping that the family's departure from Charleston will sever whatever connection appears to exist between them and the entity, or I can think of no more appropriate term, that now resides in the sealed upper floor of their former home. This letter, never sent but preserved among Preston's private papers, represents the closest thing to a medical assessment of the situation. Preston himself relocated to Richmond the following year, abandoning a thriving Charleston practice with no explanation beyond a stated desire for a change of climate. By the turn of the century, the Hargrove Wilkins house had become firmly established in local mythology, a place spoken of in hushed tones and pointed out to visitors as evidence of Charleston's hidden mysteries. What precisely lay behind its sealed windows and concealed third floor remained unknown to all but a select few, the trustees charged with maintaining its containment, and perhaps the aging descendants of Thomas Wilkins, who carried the burden of family knowledge. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the house stood as a monument to secrets well kept, to horrors glimpsed but never fully revealed, and to the extraordinary measures one man had taken to protect his family and perhaps the wider world from what he had discovered in that upper room. The story of the Wilkins family and their hasty departure from Charleston would fade into local legend, whispered about but never fully understood, a tale of terror, all the more powerful for what remained unsaid and unseen. And what of the entity that, if local tales are to be believed, remained sealed within those walls? The few fragments of Hargrove's journals that survived, combined with Thomas Wilkins's cryptic warnings, suggest a presence neither fully alive nor truly dead, a consciousness removed from its natural state and preserved through means both ingenious and abhorrent. Whether it remains contained to this day, or whether subsequent generations have unwittingly released what the Wilkins family sought so desperately to imprison, is a question perhaps best left unexamined. For those who walk the streets of Charleston's historic district, the legacy of the Hargrove Wilkins house serves as a reminder that behind the elegant facades and beneath the veneer of Southern gentility lies a darker history, a history of desperate measures taken in the face of horrors too great to be destroyed, too dangerous to be acknowledged, and too persistent to ever truly die. As one final note, it is worth observing that the trust established by Thomas Wilkins in 1875 included a provision that the property was to be maintained in perpetuity, with no possibility of sale or demolition. The document stipulated that should any future generation of the family attempt to dissolve the trust or dispose of the property, control would immediately revert to the designated trustees, with explicit instructions to maintain the integrity of the containment at all costs. This unusual legal arrangement ensured that the secrets of the third floor would remain sealed for as long as the structure itself endured. The house stands even now, its exterior maintained with the same meticulous care established by the original trust, its interior a mystery glimpsed only through the distorted recollections of those few who entered and fled. The third floor, concealed behind its false wall, remains undisturbed, at least officially. What whispers might be heard by those who press their ears to that brick barrier? What patterns might form in the condensation on those boarded windows during Charleston's humid summers? What might be glimpsed by those foolish enough to seek entry to that sealed space? These are questions that remain unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. As local historian Robert Thornton wrote in his 1899 assessment of Charleston's architectural mysteries, some secrets are best left undisturbed, some doors best left unopened, and some horrors best left contained. The Hargrove Wilkins house stands as testament to the wisdom of those who, having glimpsed what lies beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding, choose containment over confrontation, silence over revelation, and perpetual vigilance over momentary resolution. For Thomas Wilkins and his family, that glimpse came at the cost of their peace of mind and their Charleston aspirations. For Mr. Hargrove, whose experiments first unleashed whatever now occupies that sealed floor, the cost appears to have been far greater. And for those who might be tempted to unravel the mystery that has endured for nearly a century and a half, the warning left by Thomas Wilkins in his final communication regarding the property perhaps says it best. What dwells within cannot be destroyed by conventional means, cannot be reasoned with or appeased, and cannot be permitted escape. It waits with the patience of something that exists outside the constraints of mortality, and it remembers those who have contained it. May future generations forgive our inability to do more than postpone the inevitable, and may they find the wisdom to maintain the seals we have established, regardless of the cost.